Hello, I'm Vicki Pilot, Executive Director of Senior Serving Seniors, and welcome to the Blue Book Podcast. Today's podcast is the first of a two-part series taking a look at the issue of hoarding. Our guests today are Cari Taylor, Regional Mentor for South Vancouver Island and the Southern Gulf Islands for the nonprofit organization, the British Columbia Association of Community Response Networks, and Megan Sabell, the Acting Assistant Chief of Fire Prevention with the Victoria Fire Department. Today we will talk about what hoarding really is and how to identify it. In our second podcast, we will look at solutions and fixes for the problem behaviors of hoarding. Cari started the conversation by talking about when the issue of hoarding was first officially recognized.
And did you know that, interestingly enough, hoarding actually only became a thing that we were all talking about as of 1991, that there was a major study done that actually started to put some words behind it and define the actual role itself. But we do know from history that as early as the 1900s, there was a case called the Collier brothers from New York City in the early 1900s that were all struggling with hoarding behaviors. And as time went on, it all changed and everything, but it never actually had any kind of designation or definition until, like I said, the 1990s. So it's quite interesting, the history. Mm-hmm. Statistically, about 1 in 20 people have some form of clutter behavior. However, they also believe that that is underestimated, that it's actually a whole lot more people. So if you think about this, the province of British Columbia, for example, there's over 5 million people living in British Columbia. So that would mean about 90,000 are sitting with some form of clutter behavior, and about 5,000 of those would be in what Megan was talking to as an extreme case. We also see in Victoria that there's a lot more people with hoarding behaviors because it's not singular to any age group. I mean, the young hoard, the older people hoard, the homeless hoard, the elderly hoard, the rich people hoard. It's not any one particular group that is involved in any of that. It's everybody.
And so there's very specific criteria that make an excessive clutter situation a case of, say, hoarding, which is that diagnosis. But not every home that is cluttered is actually hoarding. And that's a very important designation to make, because a lot of people think that just because they have a lot of clutter in their home, or if their family member has a lot of clutter, that they must be a hoarder. But it's just a matter of some people like to have a bit more clutter than others, and some people are really generally struggling with the excessive nature of the clutter, and it's taking over their lives. Because you'll see that, there's six criteria that they look at when it comes to the actual clinical diagnosis. So first is the persistent difficulty discarding or parting with possessions regardless of their actual value. So people hold on to things because they've got that attachment to them. The difficulty is due to perceived need to save the item and to distress associated with discarding them. So there is that underlying, if I get rid of this, it's going to be very detrimental. Like, I'll need it again. I might need it someday, or if I get rid of this, it's going to be very detrimental to my sanity. Mm-hmm. The next one is difficult discarding possessions result in the accumulation. So because you're not discarding anything, more and more things are coming into the home, nothing's going out. And that congestion and clutter of the active living areas, it substantially compromises the intended use of that area. So say in the bathroom, if we start to pour more and more things in, and things start to get stored in the bathtub, then you can no longer have a shower, or you might not have access to the toilet. So it makes intervention very difficult. Hoarding causes clinical significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. So basically, if your clutter is so much that you can no longer get out of your house, you can't have people over, you can't have family over, that's a kind of like a warning sign that this is a bit more significant. The hoarding is not attributed to another medical condition. So basically, hoarding is these other criteria, the only underlying factors contributing to the clutter, not necessarily that say if a person had a physical impairment due to a medical condition and can no longer clean their home, it's not necessarily because they have hoarding tendencies, it's because they are physically unable to do that work to declutter, and so the clutter builds up because they can't do that cleaning. So that would not be a hoarding case. And next, the hoarding is not better explained by the symptoms of another medical disorder. So they've kind of really classified that hoarding is its own separate thing, basically that's difficult discarding, the need to save, the accumulation of possessions, the distress among getting rid of your possessions, and causing that significant distress or impairment in your daily life. So when we come in and we're looking at a home where someone has asked us to come do a safety assessment, one of the first things we're doing when I come in is, well, first I'm being with the fire department, checking for a working smoke alarm to make sure that they, at least have that notice if they need to exit. Then I'm looking to make sure that they have those exit pathways, because some of the cases we go into, there just isn't room to navigate through the home and to open the front door all the way in order to get out. Then I'm looking at places where, like the kitchen. So can you still cook in your kitchen? A lot of places don't. What are your clearance to combustibles? So for instance, are you using your oven as a storage shelf? We see that a lot. So in those cases, we'll tend to either unplug the oven or turn off the breaker, just so that we're taking that hazard away, since they're not using that oven or the stovetop to cook. Are they able to sleep in their bed? Some people are now, because they've got their bedroom is so full of possessions, they're having to sleep on the couch. Or in one case I went to, we had a woman was sleeping on the floor. So, it's really causing that significant distress and impairment in their daily life.
Yeah, so they've done some really interesting studies, and there has been, even if people have grown up in a poor lifestyle, depression years, all of that, and they've done a whole bunch of interesting studies that reflect that it does not matter how you were raised from that perspective. If you did not have a lot of things when you were young growing up, does not mean you will be a hoarder or somebody with clutter behavior later in life. However, we also do see a family history. So if children were raised in a very cluttered behavior home, then they tend to, there can be a family history that can pull that up later on. The other piece too that Megan spoke about earlier too was just the need to have things. And so where we need to draw a line sometimes is that it's not about the stuff. Because everybody just walks in and thinks, oh, it's all about the stuff. If you just get rid of the stuff, you'll be fine. But it's not about the stuff. It's about the attachment to the stuff. And that's why here in Victoria, we tend to see a lot more hoarding and clutter behavior, because we have an older population. But that's simply because they've lived on the planet longer, and within that framework have also then had more time to acquire items, more time to collect items, probably have had some people pass away, so then they got given those items. And then remember, it's not about the items, it's about the attachment. So how can they throw away those items that were their parents maybe, or a sibling or a friend or something like that, because then the feeling is maybe they're throwing that person away. It's about that emotional attachment. Right. We also do see some pieces with Megan was referring to earlier about the mental health issues, that things like OCD and ADHD, there's a fairly high percentage of those conditions or concerns that also fall within people that are struggling with clutter behavior and hoarding issues. So they can sort of some comorbidities, sort of some depression, anxiety, all of those pieces tend to be also part of that.
It actually contributes, because we have some of the clients that, or people that I've dealt with over the years, is they get that level of depression. They're just buried in all of their things, and then to feel better, they go out and buy something nice for themselves. And then they bring it in, and they feel better, but then they're around all their stuff and they get depressed again, so they go out and buy something else. So it is like a vicious cycle of like, I need to feel better, so I'm going to buy something for myself, but then now it's contributing to their clutter. And then they're depressed again, so then they go buy something, and it just keeps going and going and going.
One of the things, though, that we do know for sure is that if somebody has clutter behavior or excessive clutter behavior, hoarding in along that line, if you were just to go in and clean out their house within 1 year, it's called the 1 year rule, within 1 year, it will be back exactly to the way it was before. And that's because we have not dealt with the issue or the actual concern. So, because you got to remember, it's not about the person and it's not about the stuff. It is about the behavior and it is about the attachment to the stuff. So, if we don't deal with that, if we don't deal with that part of the concern, clearing out the stuff is not the solution.
Every case is different in terms of why they're hoarding or collecting, why they have clutter, what their clutter consists of, whether they're really ready to deal with it. I mean, and that is where we struggle the most, is because we get people who call us for a family friend or a neighbor or something like that, say, can you come and help this person? We can't do anything unless that person is willing to engage with us. We do have a lot of trouble in condos in terms of our right to enter. We don't have a right to enter because it's a person's private dwelling. The Office of the Fire Commissioner has deemed that hoarding is not considered an imminent hazard. If it was an imminent hazard by definition, we would be able to enter under the Fire Services Act.
One of the biggest concerns that we see in the whole hoarding, cluttering, all of those pieces is the fact that that's the behavior. That's not the person. And yet the minute you hear the word hoarding, there's so much shame, so much stigma attached to this that it's not about that.
Today's guests were Cari Taylor from the British Columbia Association of Community Response Network and Megan Sabell, the Acting Assistant Chief of Fire Prevention for the Victoria Fire Department. Join us on our next episode when Megan and Cari discuss some of the solutions to hoarding behavior and the help you or someone you know can access here in the Southern Vancouver Island region. For more information on the topic of hoarding, Google the Hoarding Education and Action Team. You will find them on their website and on Facebook, or check out the links on our show.